Hello everyone, this is Leah Whitehorse, and in this recording I'm going to be exploring the astrology of April 2025. So this month is a little quieter than the previous month in some ways because we are now out of eclipse season. But that said, we're still getting used to this very new energy, which is Neptune having moved into Aries. As we come into the month, you can see that Neptune is still on that 0 degrees, the Aries point. The Aries point, the 0 degrees of Aries, is a very animated degree. It is the first of fire. It is a shoot breaking through the ground. It is light in the dark. It is the essential divine spark. And so this degree can manifest in very overt ways, and it is very, very active. It's very energized because it's Aries. So Neptune is sitting on that 0 degrees. We still have Mars, the ruler of Aries, and now the dispositor of Neptune, still going over those degrees where it retrograded earlier in the year. But Mars is now picking up pace, and this month will actually change signs, moving into Leo. At the beginning of the month, we will still have Venus and Mercury retrograde. So we have a slow start to the month in many ways because of these two being retrograde. They're now in Pisces. They started the journey in Aries and now have retrograded back into Pisces, sitting there at the very end of the sign, activating the North Node, and that's kind of right at the beginning of the month on the 1st of April. Venus will conjoin the North Node, and on the 4th of April, Mercury will conjoin the North Node. Both of them, this is the second hit in a series of 3. I've talked about these in the separate videos on Venus and Mercury retrograde. So we know then that we're getting some kind of distinct call from the universe. Come this way, bring heart and mind together. It's important. We need to kind of speak with integrity, speak from the heart, and be kind in how we are communicating, find a way to harmonize or bring back harmony with one another. This is what we're being called to do. And we're also being called to express ourselves individually from the heart. Mercury, Venus, North Node, all in this big conjunction at the beginning of the month. Now also on the 4th of April, we're going to start the first of 3 sextiles between Saturn and Uranus. So currently Saturn is in Pisces, Uranus is in Taurus. The next sextile between these two will be on the 12th of August, and that will happen when Saturn has moved into Aries and Uranus has moved into Gemini. So there'll be a different quality to that sextile. And then the final sextile will be on the 20th of January 2026, and that'll take place once again in Pisces, Saturn, and Taurus, Uranus, because the 2 planets will have gone retrograde back into those signs just to finish up the times in those signs. So we have these 3 sextiles that are helpful aspects. So the first thing that interests me about this connection between Saturn and Uranus is that they are both the current dispositors of Pluto. So Pluto is in Aquarius. Uranus is the modern ruler of Aquarius. Saturn is the old ruler of Aquarius. So it's interesting that it feels like there's a bit of a message going on here, that we're being told that change is necessary. We know this. Pluto in Aquarius is impressing upon us the very potent requirement that something has to change in the way that we're relating to one another. Our cities need to change. Our politics needs to change. Our relationship with technology needs to change, and more and more. There's so much here about how we interact that is undergoing a profound transformation from Pluto. So Saturn forming a sextile to Uranus makes me feel as though we're getting an opportunity now to create some stability. So if you want to understand this more for your own chart, look at where Saturn is moving in your personal chart, which house, what area of life. If you can create more stability there, if you can really get to work there, Saturn is always a hard-working planet, so if you can get to work there, if you can get it together there, if you can manage things better there, then that's going to give you the opportunity to break the pattern wherever Uranus is moving. The part of the chart where Uranus currently is transiting is ripe for reinvention. There's an awakening happening in that area of your life, and something does need to change. And Uranus likes to revolutionize things. Uranus is a planet that brings in new ways, new perspectives, new technologies, new thoughts. It is the higher frequency of Mercury. It's like God mind. So there is a sense that we're kind of getting together God mind and then Saturn, old father time, which kind of tells us that we've got a lot of experience, says Saturn. We've got a lot of experience now in the changes that need to happen. We've got a lot of experience just to fall back on in life, generally speaking. We've got the wisdom of experience. In other words, we could do a little looking back and we can see how certain patterns happen, how certain things go. If you take this kind of action, it's likely that this is the consequence. That's the kind of thing we're looking at here. And then Saturn says, with that knowledge, then, we can change things. We can choose a different way. That is the sextile. This is the invitation. The opportunity is here to choose a different path, to choose a different way. However, we need to do it carefully, Saturn. We need to do it in a way that does not upset the apple cart, that doesn't just cause instability everywhere else. We need to do it slowly, says Saturn. So Saturn sextile to Uranus is a wonderful combination because it is going to really give us an opportunity for growth, but it's also sort of being quite stern. I feel there's a sternness that comes through here that says you can't just throw everything up in the air, Uranus. You have to give yourself some time to see how these changes are developing so that you can manage it carefully. You can manage this process carefully. The other analogy that I like to use here is the idea of a scientist testing different theories. It's the analogy that I use for why Saturn and Uranus actually work really well together as rulers of Aquarius, because most people, most modern astrologers can easily see why Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius, because Uranus is all about breaking free and doing things differently and all that kind of stuff, whereas Saturn is very reserved and very kind of conservative in its approach. But for good science to work, you need someone like Saturn who is going to painstakingly, carefully arrange the experiment and is willing to do that experiment again and again and again to see if the results are the same. So you need this kind of patience and responsibility and accountability, Saturn words. We need this to be able to get the job done. We need that very responsible attitude of Saturn to be able to break the rules, Uranus. You can't break the rules until you've learned the rules, says Saturn. So this is why this connection between Saturn and Uranus is so interesting. Now, we're actually going to have a lot of activation of this aspect because also on the same date, Mars is getting in on the game. Mars is going to form a sextile to Uranus and a trine to Saturn. So this is a super supportive picture. Yes, I know Venus is retrograde. Yes, I know Mercury is retrograde. And Neptune is still on that 0 degrees of Aries. So yes, the atmosphere is a little spicy at times. But we have an enormously helpful planetary picture here with Mars sextile to Uranus and trine to Saturn, whilst Uranus and Saturn form a sextile to one another. So Mars is just activating the pattern. Mars is just saying, hey guys, when you decide on how you're going to use this energy, I'm ready, I'm willing, I'm going to get started, and I'll make sure that I finish this. I will commit. Mars trine Saturn is committed to the cause. Mars sextile Uranus is the willingness, the courage, the bravery to do something different. So Mars, our inner warrior, is ready for action as Saturn and Uranus form this conversation with one another. So again, look to where Mars is in your own personal chart. This is where you can take action. This is where you can get something started that is going to tap into this energy and is going to be helpful for you. On the 7th of April, Mercury will station direct in Pisces. So now comes the turnaround. Quite often the station day itself can be a little wobbly. I always say this, but I always think it's worth knowing that on these dates, the planet concerned is stationary. In other words, nothing is moving. So we need to give it a little bit of time for things to start moving again. And Mercury will be in the shadow zone of this retrograde up until the 26th of April. So we've got that long to sort of unravel or work through whatever was going on during the retrograde period. But still, we often do notice that once we've got past the station day, that things are starting to move a little better than they were before. On the 11th of April, Mars will form a trine to the North Node. So this is activating, which is what Mars always does. It's activating our karma, our destiny. There is something happening, something that is put into motion that is helping to guide us to where we need to go as far as our soul's evolution is concerned. And in a way, we could say that the actions that we're taking around this time have the ability to open doors. It's like kicking the door to destiny open. That's the kind of sense I get with Mars trine to the North Node. On the 13th of April, we will have the full moon. So this is going to be a full moon in Libra. If you enjoy my work and want to go deeper into the lunations, then you can either join my Substack or my Patreon. Both of them have access to my in-depth readings for the lunations, as well as weekly forecasts and much more. So we have a full moon in Libra at 23 degrees and 20 minutes of that sign. And it is going to be opposing the sun in Aries, whilst the sun is also tightly conjunct to Chiron. It's just coming off a conjunction to Chiron. So this is going to be quite an animated lunation. There are other aspects, Mars here as well. So this is going to be quite a dynamic lunation. It's going to bring in a lot of stories. It's going to activate, particularly, it's going to activate a very stormy picture that is beginning to grow in the background, because as Mars moves towards the end of the sign Cancer, it's slowly moving towards an opposition, its final opposition with Pluto. We have had 3 of these. So I'll talk more about that in a moment. But just so that you understand that this lunation is super, super dynamic. And for us personally, it will also activate our own Chiron transits, our own Mars transits, our own Pluto transits. So if you have planets or points around 22 to 24, 25 of Libra or Aries or Cancer or Capricorn, This is particularly going to engage with your chart, but I think all of us on the world stage, it's likely we will see something around this time which could be a little heated. And I think the main thing we need to be aware of is that Chiron is very strongly in play, and therefore there could be some hurt feelings, or if we can get the high vibe, we could actually find a way to heal some of our differences. Now, if we wanted to add a cherry on top of that full moon picture, we also have Venus stationing direct on the same day. It's just about an hour after the full moon. So, like I said, a super, super dynamic picture on the 13th of April. So Venus stationing direct, ending that long retrograde that we've been under. She's now in Pisces, so she is exalted in Pisces. But once again, we need to give it time to find our feet. And Venus will be stationing pretty close to Saturn. So that, I think, in some ways will help. Although we do need to just bear in mind the shadow side of that connection, where sometimes we can feel not good enough. So if we fall into that, if we lose our kind of emotional footing as Venus is stationing, and we find ourselves unbalanced, remember that this is a full moon in Libra, then it's easy to end up feeling hurt. So this is why it's a very, very sensitive picture that we have going on here. So as ever, just take a note, make a mental note of what's going on around this time. And we just need to kind of understand that we're more easily triggered under these influences. On the 15th of April, Juno will move back into Scorpio. I think I talked about this quite a bit in the March forecast, if I remember rightly, when I spoke about Juno stationing retrograde. I know I talked about it in one of the weeklies as well. So Juno is currently in retrograde motion, so she's backing into Scorpio, which will immediately mean that she's starting to engage once again with Uranus. I did note, I can't remember where now, which reading it was, but I did note before that Uranus opposite to Juno, generally speaking, is kind of like a divorce aspect. Of course, we can think of lots of different ways of interpreting this, but just the very first thing that comes to mind, because Uranus tends to want to change things and, throws things up in the air, like I was saying before. But also, Juno is the marriage asteroid, or traditionally associated with marriage, amongst other things. And I was talking about how a lot of marriages, particularly international relations, have been breaking down recently. So she started the retrograde in Sagittarius, the sign of the overseas. So we've got some kind of issues going on about resources, and who is agreeing to what are the commitments here. That's what Juno in Scorpio wants to know. And on a personal level, Juno going back into our Scorpio house is kind of like an invitation to commit to overcoming our fears in this part of our lives, illustrated by whichever house Juno is going through. So we're committing now to getting past the fear. So we need to go back over this, Juno says. We need to go back over this. We need to get underneath why you might be resisting some kind of commitment, whether that's literal with a relationship, or whether it's just committing to a course of action, or committing to a particular path in your life. So Juno is going to help us with these changes, because ultimately Scorpio is also about change as well. On the 17th of April, Jupiter is going to form a sesquiquadrate aspect with Pluto. Yes, it's a mouthful. Sesquiquadrate. Sometimes people call it a sesquisquare, but I just go with the first one. I'm not saying it again. So it is a minor aspect of 135 degrees. But I don't tend to find it's that minor. It has a lot of force to it. Sesquiquadrates have the action of sort of spinning things out of control. There's the idea of making a mountain out of a molehill. And even though sometimes they can be useful because they really push things along, there's a lot of energy in this aspect. At other times, the analogy that I use a lot is the idea of using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. In other words, it's very easy to overdo, to overreach, just over too much. That's the kind of energy that's in play. And it's particularly noticeable with Jupiter, who loves to magnify everything, and Pluto, who is all into power. Pluto and Jupiter, when we get them together in a challenging aspect, there can be, particularly in Gemini, Jupiter in Gemini is all like the big talk coming down and being shown a sort of fist smashing on a desk, making their point. I'm going to talk big here and I'm going to make my point and I'm going to tell you how it is. It's that kind of vibe that's going on with Jupiter, sesquiquadrate, Pluto. Somebody here really wants to be heard, and I want to say really wants to be obeyed as well. So, I don't really know what that's going on about, but we'll just have to see. So how can we work personally with this sometimes challenging energy? So the positive is that Jupiter in Gemini has a lot of knowledge, and Jupiter in Gemini is kind of positive thinking. Jupiter in Gemini really wants to tell a good story. It wants to have a good story to tell. And Pluto is incredibly powerful. It's afraid of nothing. So positively, we could really use this kind of energy to kind of push ourselves forward, especially if we've been feeling scared. This would be the perfect time to sort of tap into the mind and get the mind on board with the changes we want to make in our own lives, or the things that we want to get rid of, whatever that is, whatever Pluto is for you. The difficulty, I think, for all of us, just going back to that fist being smashed on the table, is that in trying to get control, we again might overreach or even sort of promise too much. That's also a possibility. And I'm also just finding myself wondering as well whether this sesquiquadrate might be connected to some kind of big secret that might come out around this time. On the 18th of April, Mars will enter Leo. So Mars, of course, has been here before. Mars entered Leo last year and stationed very early on in that transit before returning to Cancer. So now Mars is finally in a sign that he has an affinity for. This is, after all, another fire sign. Mars rules Aries, the first of the fire signs. So Mars in Leo is much happier. Mars in Cancer, this is the sign of Mars's fall. So Mars struggles to work here. He can work here, but it's easier as soon as he gets into Leo. So the pace starts to pick up. We start to feel as though things again are moving, and they're really starting to move. And we start to kind of get this sense that we want to take a few more risks wherever Mars moves. This is what we want to take action on, and this is how we take action. So Leo is super creative. So we're motivated to create, to enjoy life. It's ruled by the sun, so sunny, happy, shiny people. Mars wants some of that, please, especially after all the stuff in Cancer. So Mars is really gunning for having a good time, finally. But there's just that sticky little problem I talked about earlier on, the opposition with Pluto. We'll come to that in a moment, just keep a mental note. On the 19th of April, the sun will enter Taurus. So now we are in Taurus season. Happy birthday to me. My sun is at 0 Taurus. Actually, my birthday is on the 20th, but anyway. So 19th of April, the sun goes into Taurus. And the sun is now illuminating a need for security, emotional security, financial security, just this sense that we know where we are. Often there is a feeling as well of wanting to slow down a little, which is kind of interesting because that's going to clash a bit with Mars, because Mars, like I said before, is now in Leo and is probably, kicking up his heels and getting really excited that finally he can do things after all that time held back in the retrograde and back in Cancer. But yet the sun says we do need to slow down just to appreciate where we are. Taurus is a sign that's connected often to farming and agriculture and just the land. It is the first of the earth signs. And the first thing that we have, that we own, it's also possessions. The first thing that we own is our body, our physical body. So when the sun is in Taurus, yes, we have the focus on security and money and possessions and all those kinds of things and our resources. But there's also a spotlight on our connection to our physical body. And the idea is to get really, really present so that we can truly appreciate exactly what we have already. Because whilst the sun was in Aries, we were super focused on what we can get, how we're going to get it, what we're going to do, all of our passions and our excitement and our pioneering and challenging. This is all Aries stuff, but Taurus is slow down and smell the roses. Give yourself time to actually enjoy what you have created so far and time to reconnect with your physical body so that you can get really present and know what you need. Also on this date, as the sun moves into Taurus, Mars will form a trine with Neptune. So once again, Neptune now on the 0 degrees of Aries, the Aries point. Mars is, of course, the ruler of Aries. So Mars now is the dispositor of Neptune. So Mars forming a trine to Neptune really does activate our imagination. I really like this connection. Yes, I know Pluto's hovering there in the background as well, but we do have an opportunity perhaps to take action, again, to take a risk, Mars in Leo, to create something from our imagination with Neptune, or just simply to fight for a dream, to stand up for an ideal. This has a real kind of hero quality to it. I wrote down the word soldiers of fortune for this aspect as well. So there is this kind of story coming in that feels very much about like big heroes and sort of superheroes. That's the kind of word I'm looking for, superheroes. Now, some people are kind of superheroes. As I'm recording this, there are some fire engines going off in the background. Those people, the firemen, they are superheroes in my book. And then there are people who sort of think of themselves as a superhero, and maybe they're not. And this is Neptune's influence, of course. Neptune is a planet that can lead us a merry dance if we're not careful, because we can get very lost in these ideals of how things could be, how things should be. Neptune is like the paradise sort of being waved in front of our nose, and we want it. And that's Mars Neptune as well. I want this beautiful dream that you're showing me, and I'm going to take action. But of course, we have to be careful, because that dream that we're seeing, again, because it's a dream, it might not be possible, or it might not be, possible in the way that we're thinking. So I think it's important we're aware that this is in play, but it is super imaginative, wonderful for anything to do with arts. If you're a painter, a writer, anything in that way, take a risk and do some kind of different technique even. So it's really good for this kind of energy. On the 21st of April, we will have Saturn conjoining the North Node. So now there is some kind of realization that comes into play when it comes to our evolving karma There's maybe a lesson, or maybe we need to take responsibility. Perhaps we need to just crystallize our intention of where it is we would like to go and what it is we would like to do. What are you building? What's the dream that you want to build, says Saturn in Pisces, watery, imaginative Pisces. Because this is the way. Here is the opening, says Saturn conjunct the North Node. I will open the way for you if you take responsibility, if you commit to this soul path. So we need to take it seriously. This karmic lesson that's coming through, we need to take this seriously, says Saturn. Venus will also be here as well, joining the North Node on the 24th of April. So putting the chart on that date, you can actually see we'll also have Ceres and the Moon as well in this sign. So we're going to have this big wave coming through as Saturn and Venus connect with the North Node. So this is commit to the path of the heart. Venus is always about what we love, what we're attracted to. Maybe it's again a reminder that what is in our heart is what we're bringing into reality. Is this feeding us? Is the vision, Pisces, feeding us, Ceres? Is it something that will sustain us? Is this vision that you have sustainable, Ceres? And also the Moon as well. The Moon is asking us to really tap into our feelings about all of this as well and listen. What is your gut telling you? What is your gut telling you? Because now is the time to take responsibility for your own karmic unfolding with Saturn conjunct the North Node. Really powerful, really beautiful kinds of energies coming through from this. I feel it's very soft. So even though it's Saturn, that's kind of interesting because Saturn's like he can be kind of prickly sometimes when he's breathing down my neck and pushing me to get things finished. That's the side of him that I'm very used to. But there's a softness too with Saturn, particularly in Pisces. This is ancient angels, creatures that have walked the earth since the beginning of time. This is our ancestors, Saturn in Pisces, who are always cheering us on and singing in the background. So there's something very soft and yet extraordinarily powerful that's coming through from this ripple of energies from Ceres, North Node, Venus and Saturn, all in Pisces, joined by the Moon as we come towards the end of the month. We need to lean into this. I feel like it is a signal saying we're here because as we come to the end of the month, we will then have Mars opposite to Pluto. And it just so happens that also on the 27th of April, we will have a new moon in Taurus. So what an interesting story we have going on here. We have the end of a long-running drama that started on the 3rd of November 2024, when Mars first formed an opposition to Pluto. So we have had a long-running drama, a big argument, a big conflict. We've had intensification of conflict for sure out there on the world stage. The date of that opposition doesn't kind of escape me. Obviously, it's around the time of the elections in America and so on. So Mars opposite Pluto has really made itself felt. So I'm curious to see what this final pass might bring. Yes, sometimes it can be an explosive mix of energies because Mars does not want to give up. He's the warrior. But Pluto is incredibly powerful. And this is chasing power. This is fighting for power or over power. Who has the power and who doesn't? And again, taking big risks. Mars in Leo and wanting to have attention. Maybe doing something to get attention. That's also Mars in Leo in opposition to Pluto. So we do need to play this one very carefully in our own lives. If Mars is kind of connecting with something in your own chart and activating Pluto, then there is just a need to just take a step back if you feel triggered. Anything that's around sort of 2 to 6 degrees of the fixed sign, so Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, Taurus, anything that's around those degrees is going to be getting quite a lot of animation from Mars opposite to Pluto. So yes, if you're triggered, take a step back before taking action, because sometimes Mars opposite to Pluto can really blow up. And, you know, it's hard to sort of take things back. It can be very, irrevocable with Mars opposite to Pluto. Positively, it's a brave action that brings things to an end. That's the really best way that we could use this energy. And then we have a new start as we finish this potent, tense, sometimes troublesome, conflicting exchange of energies with Mars and Pluto. We have a new start with a new moon in Taurus. And like I said before, Taurus is about slowing down. It's about appreciation, resources. Maybe there is some kind of important new beginning that is going to help us to gain more security, because we need to feel secure, especially after Mars opposite Pluto. We kind of need to feel secure again. And bearing in mind that we still have that opposition going on between Juno and Uranus, we've also got Hygeia now in Taurus as well. So there's a lot of kind of healing work that we're trying to do when it comes to what we have and what we share. And there is some kind of blossoming new idea or new approach that's coming through with this new moon in Taurus, where we can literally even plant seeds for the future. So we just need to manage the final hit of Mars opposite Pluto carefully so that we can metaphorically gain the gold of the new moon in Taurus. So this brings me to the end of this exploration of April 2025. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please do click a like and subscribe. It always helps the algorithm. And if you would like to hear more from me, I have put all my links below to my website, Substack, Patreon, and all my social media. I do post to my Daily Cosmic Tides website and Facebook and Instagram every day, a meditative piece that's about the aspects of the day. So if you enjoy that kind of content, do check those out as well. I will see you again soon. And in the meantime, I wish you many blessings on your path.